Some deaths leave evidence behind. Others leave questions that refuse to stay buried. Number 1. In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers died in Russia's northern Ural Mountains after something drove them from their tent into lethal cold. Investigators found the tent cut open from inside, while several victims had severe chest or skull injuries. For decades, theories ranged from secret weapons to infrasound and far stranger possibilities. Modern research has produced a compelling explanation: a delayed slab avalanche triggered after the hikers cut into the slope and wind deposited additional snow above them. Computer modeling shows such a slab could have caused the reported injuries. Later expeditions even documented avalanches nearby. Yet researchers themselves acknowledge that the model does not explain every controversial detail, including the hikers' behavior after abandoning shelter. Science may have found the opening chapter of the disaster. The final pages are still missing. Number 2. In November 1872, the Mary Celeste sailed from New York carrying industrial alcohol toward Genoa. On board were Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their young daughter, and 7 crewmen. Weeks later, another vessel discovered the Mary Celeste drifting hundreds of miles east of the Azores. The ship was still seaworthy. Most of its cargo remained aboard. Personal belongings were still there. But all 10 people had vanished, along with the lifeboat. No confirmed bodies were ever recovered, and nobody aboard was ever heard from again. Investigators found no convincing evidence of piracy or murder. One modern theory suggests Briggs feared the vessel was taking on dangerous water and ordered a temporary evacuation, perhaps after problems with the pumps. But temporary evacuations normally include the part where everybody returns. Whatever happened after they entered that lifeboat disappeared with them. Number 3. In February 1978, 5 young men from Yuba County, California, drove to a college basketball game and somehow ended up deep in the Plumas National Forest, far from their expected route home. Their abandoned car was later found on a mountain road. Months afterward, searchers discovered 4 of the men dead, or evidence confirming their deaths. The 5th, Gary Mathias, was never found. The strangest discovery was Ted Wire, inside a Forest Service trailer, stocked near enough to survival supplies to make the situation maddening. Food had been eaten, yet a larger supply capable of sustaining the group for months remained untouched. A propane system that could have provided heat apparently went unused. Why they drove into the mountains, why they left a functioning car, and why available resources were barely used remain disputed. It feels less like one mystery than several mysteries sharing the same snow-covered road. Number 4. In 1948, an unidentified man was found dead on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia, dressed neatly and carrying no identification. His pockets offered almost nothing useful, but investigators later discovered a tiny scrap of paper bearing the Persian words Tamam Shud, meaning finished, torn from a rare copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Police eventually located the matching book, which contained mysterious letters resembling a code and a telephone number connected to a local woman. Poisoning was suspected, yet no poison was conclusively identified. Decades later, genetic genealogy research strongly suggested the dead man was Carl Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. That may finally answer who he was, but not the question that made the case famous. Why did Webb die alone on that beach, carrying a cryptic literary message while leaving behind almost no obvious explanation? Number 5. In 1954, 2 sisters in Christchurch, New Zealand, discovered something deeply disturbing inside their family home. Their mother, Honora Reaper, had supposedly gone away. Instead, investigators learned that the woman had been killed during an outing in Victoria Park, and the case exposed one of New Zealand's most infamous crimes. The killers were her teenage daughter, Pauline Parker, and Pauline's close friend, Juliet Hume, who later became the successful crime novelist Anne Perry. Unlike many mysteries here, investigators established how Honora died and who killed her. What remains haunting is the psychology preserved in Pauline's diaries, an elaborate private world, intense attachment, and planning that transformed adolescent fantasy into calculated violence. Psychologists and historians have debated the relationship and motives ever since. The mystery is not who swung the weapon. It is how 2 intelligent teenagers crossed the invisible line between imagining murder and actually carrying it out. Number 6. In 1922, the Hinterkaifeck farm in Bavaria became the setting for a mystery so unnerving it still reads like a carefully constructed nightmare. 6 people living on the isolated property were murdered, most apparently lured individually into the barn before being killed with a farm tool. But the disturbing events began earlier. farmer Andreas Gruber reportedly noticed footprints leading from the forest toward the house, with none leading back. He also described hearing footsteps in the attic and discovering a newspaper nobody in the household had purchased. After the killings, evidence suggested someone may have remained at the farm, feeding the cattle and using the kitchen before disappearing. Police investigated numerous suspects but never secured a conviction. More than a century later, the killer's identity remains unknown. Someone apparently entered Hinterkaifeck, destroyed an entire household, then behaved as though the farm temporarily belonged to them. Number 7. In 1943, 4 boys searching for bird nests in Hagley Wood, England, climbed near a hollow wych elm and discovered a human skull inside its trunk. Police recovered almost an entire female skeleton and concluded the woman had likely died roughly 18 months earlier. Then the mystery acquired its unforgettable signature. Graffiti began appearing locally asking, "Who put Bella down the wych elm?" Nobody has ever conclusively identified Bella. Theories have included murder, espionage, occult ritual, and connections to wartime intelligence, but none has been proved. Even the circumstances of placing a body inside the tree remain puzzling because the opening was awkward and concealment would have required deliberate effort. Her remains were later lost, eliminating opportunities for modern forensic testing. The killer vanished, the victim lost her official identity, and even the evidence eventually disappeared. All that survived was one question painted repeatedly on walls. Number 8. In 1959, 2 men were discovered dead on Morro do Vintém, a hill overlooking Niterói, Brazil, wearing suits, waterproof coats, and homemade lead masks covering their eyes. They were identified as electronics technicians Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira de Cruz. Beside them lay a notebook containing instructions that roughly referenced arriving at a location, taking capsules, waiting for a signal, and protecting metal while awaiting a mask. There were no obvious traumatic injuries, and decomposition complicated toxicological testing, leaving the precise cause of death unresolved. Investigators learned that the men had an interest in spiritualism and experiments involving supposed contact with supernatural forces. That explains some context, but not what they swallowed, what signal they expected, or why lead eye shields seemed necessary. 2 technically trained men climbed a hill, apparently following a planned procedure. Whatever experiment they believed they were conducting ended with both dead. Number 9. In 1970, hikers discovered a badly burned woman in Norway's remote Isdalen Valley, a place later nicknamed Death Valley. Police found labels removed from her clothing and discovered suitcases containing wigs, coded notes, foreign currency, and several identities used while traveling through Europe. Investigators eventually reconstructed parts of her journey, yet nobody could establish with certainty who she really was. An autopsy found sleeping pills in her body and carbon monoxide in her blood, leading authorities to classify the death as probable suicide. But later, isotope analysis of her teeth suggested she had grown up somewhere around Germany before moving elsewhere. Witnesses also remembered unusual behavior and mysterious companions. Espionage theories followed naturally, especially given the Cold War setting. Modern science narrowed her origins dramatically, yet the central questions remain untouched: her true identity, her purpose in Norway, and what actually happened in that lonely valley. Number 10. In 1995, staff at Oslo's luxurious Plaza Hotel discovered a woman dead inside room 2805 from a gunshot wound. She had registered as Jennifer Fairgate, supposedly from Belgium, but investigators found the address and other information she provided were false. No passport, credit cards, or meaningful identification appeared in the room. Even stranger, many clothing labels had been removed, and investigators struggled to explain how she stayed at an expensive hotel without leaving a normal financial trail. Police concluded that she had taken her own life, yet her identity remains uncertain. Later examinations of her teeth suggested she was probably born in East Germany and had spent childhood somewhere in that region. Her movements before reaching Oslo remain frustratingly incomplete. Forensic science has provided an approximate age and geographic history, but the woman behind the invented name remains almost completely invisible, as if someone deliberately erased her before she died. Number 11. In 1994, German police encountered one of Europe's strangest roadside mysteries when a man named Günther Stoll died after a sequence of bizarre events. Before leaving home, Stoll suddenly declared that something had become clear to him, wrote the mysterious word YOGTZE on paper, then crossed it out. Hours later, he appeared frightened at a pub before eventually being discovered severely injured near his crashed Volkswagen. The strangest detail was that investigators believed his injuries had occurred before the crash. Stoll had apparently been struck by another vehicle elsewhere and later ended up inside his own car. Before dying, he reportedly indicated that other men had been present. Police never established who they were or what YOGTZE meant. It might have been a code, a name, meaningless writing, or something only Stoll understood. His final hours form a trail of clues that seems almost designed to stop one answer short of explanation. Number 12. In 2009, Bobby and Sherilyn Jamison disappeared with their young daughter Madison after driving into the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma while reportedly considering land there. Their pickup truck was later found abandoned. Inside were their wallets, identification, phones, clothing, and thousands of dollars in cash. Their dog was also discovered alive inside the vehicle. Search teams found no convincing trail leading to the family. Then, 4 years later, hunters discovered skeletal remains several miles away, eventually confirmed as all three Jamisons. Time had erased much of the forensic evidence, and medical examiners could not determine exactly how they died. Investigators considered numerous possibilities, but none produced a definitive explanation. The abandoned cache made a simple robbery difficult to understand, while the remote location complicated everything else. 3 people vanished together, their possessions stayed behind, and years later their bodies answered the question of where they went while answering almost nothing about why. Number 13. In 1957, 2 sisters, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, died after being struck by a car in Northumberland, England. Their parents later had twin daughters, Gillian and Jennifer, and what followed turned a family tragedy into a famous case studied by psychiatrist Ian Stevenson. The younger twins reportedly displayed behaviors and statements their parents associated with the deceased sisters. Jennifer also had birthmarks that were said to correspond with marks on Jacqueline's body. Most strikingly, the twins reportedly recognized certain toys and locations connected with sisters they had never met. Stevenson documented the case while investigating claims of reincarnation, but conventional explanations remain possible, including parental influence, selective memory, coincidence, and information absorbed indirectly during childhood. No experiment established that memories literally transferred between lives. Yet the Pollock case remains unsettling because the mystery moved beyond unexplained death into something stranger. Whether human memory can appear where, according to ordinary biology, it should never have existed. Number 14. In 1999, police found 41-year-old Ricky McCormick dead in a Missouri cornfield, roughly 15 miles from his home. His body had decomposed enough that investigators could not establish a definitive cause of death. But 2 handwritten notes discovered in his pockets turned the case into something far stranger. Both pages contained rows of letters, numbers, parentheses, and apparently coded phrases. McCormick's family said he had used unusual writing before, yet investigators could not determine what these particular messages meant. Years later, the FBI publicly released the notes and asked amateur cryptographers for help, hoping someone could break what investigators called an encrypted message. Thousands tried. No confirmed solution emerged. The possibility remains that the pages were personal shorthand rather than sophisticated encryption. But if they describe where McCormick had been, whom he met, or why he died, the answer may already exist on paper, waiting for somebody to read it. Number 15. In 2009, a middle-aged man arrived alone in Sligo, Ireland, using the name Peter Bergman. Security cameras recorded him moving through the town, sometimes carrying a purple plastic bag and returning without it, apparently disposing of possessions where cameras could not follow. He gave a false Austrian address, purchased stamps, and traveled to nearby Ross's Point. Days later, his body was discovered on the beach. Investigators found no identification and almost no useful personal belongings. An autopsy revealed serious health problems, including advanced prostate cancer and bone tumors, but seawater complicated determining precisely how he died. Even stranger, labels had been removed from much of his clothing. Police circulated his image internationally, yet nobody conclusively identified him. The name Peter Bergman was apparently invented. Whoever this man really was, his final days suggest careful preparation, not necessarily for death itself, but for ensuring that his previous life could not easily follow him. Number 16. In 2010, 32-year-old screenwriter Ray Rivera disappeared from Baltimore after receiving a phone call at home and leaving suddenly. His car was later located near the Belvedere Hotel, where investigators eventually discovered his body inside a lower section of the building after an apparent fall through a roof. Police considered suicide, but Rivera's family questioned that conclusion, and the medical examiner classified his death as undetermined. Investigators faced a basic physical puzzle. Exactly where had Rivera fallen from, and how did he reach that location? His phone and glasses were reportedly found near the scene, while a strange typed note discovered taped behind his home computer contained names, quotations, references to movies, and cryptic personal ideas. Authorities did not establish that the note explained his death. Rivera's case remains disturbing because the evidence provides several possible stories, yet no reconstruction has convincingly connected his final phone call, movements, fall, and mysterious note. Number 17. In 2010, British intelligence employee Gareth Williams was found dead inside his London apartment under circumstances that seemed almost mechanically impossible. His body was inside a large sports bag placed in the bathtub, and the bag had been padlocked from the outside, with the key found inside. Williams worked for Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency and had been seconded to MI6, immediately feeding theories of espionage. Investigators tested whether someone could climb into an identical bag and lock it without assistance. Repeated attempts demonstrated how extraordinarily difficult the maneuver was. An inquest later concluded that Williams was probably unlawfully killed, although a subsequent police review said it was possible he had entered the bag himself. No definitive killer, motive, or sequence of events has been established. Forensic evidence produced possibilities instead of certainty. The central question remains brutally simple. How does a man end up locked inside a bag that investigators struggled to lock themselves? Number 18. In 1996, Canadian construction worker Blair Adams suddenly became convinced that someone intended to kill him. He emptied his bank accounts, attempted to cross into the United States, bought an expensive airline ticket he never used, rented a car, and eventually reached Knoxville, Tennessee. Hours later, he was found dead in a parking lot. His pants had been removed, his shoes and socks were off, and money from several currencies lay scattered nearby. An autopsy determined that he had suffered a powerful blow to the abdomen that ruptured his stomach, producing fatal internal injuries. Yet investigators never established who struck him or why. The scattered cash complicated robbery as an obvious motive, while Adams's fearful behavior before leaving Canada created another possibility. Perhaps he genuinely believed danger was following him. Whether his fear reflected an actual threat or something else remains unknown. He predicted his own violent death, and then, hundreds of miles from home, it happened. Number 19. In 1930, 3 lighthouse keepers vanished from the Flannan Isles off Scotland, leaving behind one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. When a relief vessel reached the isolated island of Eilean Moor, keepers James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur were nowhere to be found. There was no confirmed sign of a violent struggle, and their bodies were never recovered. Investigators found storm damage near the western landing, including displaced equipment high above the waterline, suggesting enormous seas had struck the island. The official explanation was that the men probably went outside to secure equipment and were swept away by an unexpected wave. It is plausible, perhaps even likely, but impossible to prove. Why all 3 experienced keepers would expose themselves simultaneously remains debated. Later retellings added dramatic details unsupported by original records, making the truth harder to separate from legend. The Atlantic supplied the simplest suspect and permanently removed the witnesses. Number 20. In 1929, German filmmaker Manfred von Richthofen's cousin, Egon von Jordan, entered Berlin's Hotel Adlon with a companion and became part of a mystery involving an apparently ordinary hotel room. But an even better documented locked room puzzle came decades later with American scientist John Paisley. In 1978, Paisley disappeared from his sailboat on Chesapeake Bay. His body surfaced days later, weighted with diving belts and carrying a gunshot wound behind one ear. Paisley had worked closely with the CIA on Soviet intelligence analysis, immediately raising suspicions of espionage. Investigators considered suicide, yet questions persisted about the weights, the weapon, and circumstances aboard his boat. His wife reportedly doubted that he killed himself. No public evidence ever established an assassination either. Paisley's death remains suspended between explanations: suicide, homicide, intelligence intrigue, or some combination, investigators could never conclusively reconstruct from the cold waters of the Chesapeake. Number 21. In 1931, a charred body was discovered inside a locked garage in Northampton, England, beginning the strange case of Alfred Rouse. Unlike many mysteries here, Rouse was convicted and executed for murder after prosecutors argued he had burned another man inside his car to fake his own death. The truly unresolved part is the victim. Rouse admitted picking up a hitchhiker, but claimed not to know his identity. Authorities received numerous suggestions, yet none could be proved. Modern researchers have attempted to connect the victim with missing men, including William Briggs, but certainty remains elusive because crucial physical evidence disappeared long ago. The case, therefore, contains a remarkable historical contradiction. Britain executed a man for murdering someone whose name the country still does not know. The killer entered the record books. The victim became evidence. Nearly a century later, science can revisit theories, but it cannot easily reconstruct DNA from remains no longer available for testing. Number 22. In 1981, 29-year-old Ken McElroy was sitting in his pickup truck on the main street of Skidmore, Missouri, when gunfire erupted in broad daylight. McElroy had developed a notorious reputation in the community and had recently been convicted of shooting a local grocer, although he remained free while appealing. On the morning he died, dozens of people were reportedly nearby. At least 2 weapons were apparently fired. Yet when investigators began asking the obvious question, who shot him, the town effectively became silent. McElroy's wife identified a possible gunman, but prosecutors concluded they lacked sufficient evidence to bring charges. No one was convicted. The mystery is remarkable not because there were no witnesses, but because there may have been too many. Ballistics could describe the shooting, and police could reconstruct the scene, but neither could overcome a community where usable testimony seemed to evaporate at exactly the same moment. Number 23. In 1987, 18-year-old Kurt Sova attended a party near Cleveland, Ohio, and vanished. 5 days later, his body appeared in a ravine that searchers and family members said had already been checked. His body showed no obvious traumatic injury, and the coroner could not determine a definitive cause of death. Then came the details that transformed a tragic disappearance into a puzzle. Witness accounts conflicted about when Kurt was last seen, and an unidentified man reportedly told someone that Kurt would be found dead before the body actually appeared. His right shoe was missing, while other circumstances raised questions about whether he had died where he was discovered. Investigators considered alcohol exposure and accidental death, but no explanation comfortably accounted for everything. Decades later, authorities continued examining the case. The most unsettling possibility is simple. If Kurt was not lying in that ravine during earlier searches, someone knew exactly where he was before placing him there. Number 24. In 1988, mathematics student Sigrid Paulus disappeared after leaving her university residence in Germany. But another European case from that era became even more baffling: the death of 20-year-old Cindy James in Vancouver. For years, James reported frightening harassment, threatening telephone calls, break-ins, and physical attacks. Police investigated extensively, but struggled to identify an attacker, and some investigators suspected the incidents might have been self-inflicted. Then, in 1989, James disappeared. Her body was found about 2 weeks later near an abandoned house, with her hands and feet bound behind her and a nylon stocking around her neck. Drugs were detected in her system. A coroner's jury ultimately returned an open verdict, unable to determine whether her death resulted from homicide, suicide, or accident. That leaves an extraordinary contradiction. Either an unseen tormentor evaded years of surveillance, or James somehow created circumstances that investigators themselves could never convincingly reproduce or explain. Number 25. In 1953, scientist Frank Olson plunged from a New York hotel window after working for the United States Army's biological warfare program. Initially, his death was treated as suicide. 2 decades later, his family learned a staggering secret. Days before dying, Olson had unknowingly been given LSD during a CIA experiment connected to the agency's mind control research. The government acknowledged the drugging and compensated his family, but that disclosure created larger questions instead of closing the case. Olson had become distressed after the experiment, making suicide plausible. Yet when his body was exhumed in the 1990s, a forensic examination raised questions about injuries that some experts believed could have occurred before the fall. His family came to believe he had been killed, while official accounts continued to dispute that conclusion. Science can explain what LSD does to the brain. it still cannot tell us exactly what happened inside Olsen's hotel room before the window opened. Number 26. In 1951, 67-year-old Mary Reeser was found dead inside her apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida, in one of America's strangest fire scenes. Much of her body and the chair beneath her had been reduced to ash, yet the surrounding apartment suffered comparatively limited fire damage. The bizarre scene helped popularize claims of spontaneous human combustion, but investigators found no evidence that a human body could simply ignite by itself. The FBI favored a far less supernatural explanation. Reeser, who smoked and had taken sleeping pills, may have accidentally caught fire, with body fat and clothing sustaining a slow wick-like burn. That mechanism explains much of the destruction, but the extraordinary concentration of heat made the case famous. Science does not need a human fireball to explain Reeser's death. What remains remarkable is how an ordinary ignition could produce a scene that looked anything but ordinary. Number 27. In 1972, 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma left her home in Springfield Township, New Jersey, intending to visit a friend. 6 weeks later, a dog returned from the woods carrying part of a human arm, leading searchers to Jeanette's remains high inside an abandoned quarry on a formation locals called the Devil's Teeth. Her decomposed body offered investigators frustratingly little evidence, and the exact cause of death could not be established, although strangulation was suspected. Then rumors transformed the case into suburban nightmare fuel. Newspapers reported strange objects, wooden crosses, and claims of occult activity around the body. Later reviews of surviving crime scene photographs cast serious doubt on the sensational ritual sacrifice stories, showing how quickly folklore can contaminate a genuine mystery. Strip away the satanic panic mythology, and something colder remains. A teenager died in an isolated place. Forensic evidence could not reveal exactly how, and more than half a century later, nobody has been convicted. Number 28. In 1994, Gloria Ramirez arrived at Riverside General Hospital in California critically ill with advanced cervical cancer. What happened next turned an emergency room into something resembling a hazardous material incident. Medical workers reported an unusual odor around Ramirez, an oily sheen on her skin, and strange particles in blood drawn during treatment. Then staff members began becoming sick. Several fainted, others experienced nausea, breathing problems, dizziness, or muscle spasms, and the emergency department was evacuated. Ramirez died shortly afterward from complications of her cancer, but explaining why the people treating her became ill proved far harder. One scientific hypothesis proposed that dimethyl sulfoxide in her body underwent chemical changes that eventually produced a dangerous compound, but that explanation remains disputed. Other investigators considered mass psychogenic illness, which also failed to satisfy everyone. Ramirez's cause of death is known. The medical mystery is why simply treating her apparently made trained professionals collapse. Number 29. In 1985, acclaimed artist Ana Mendieta fell from the 34th floor Manhattan apartment she shared with her husband, sculptor Carl Andre. The couple had reportedly argued that night, and Andre told authorities that Mendieta had gone out the window during the dispute. Prosecutors charged him with murder, arguing that the circumstances pointed toward violence rather than suicide or accident. Andre chose a trial before a judge instead of a jury, and was ultimately acquitted because the evidence did not prove beyond reasonable doubt what had happened inside the apartment. That legal verdict answered whether prosecutors had proved murder. It did not answer how Mendieta actually went through the window. There was no surviving witness who could settle the competing versions of those final moments. Her death remains one of the art world's most fiercely debated mysteries because the possibilities are brutally limited: accident, suicide, or homicide. The physics of the fall are obvious. The human action immediately before it remains unknowable. Number 30. In 2013, 21-year-old Canadian student Elisa Lam disappeared while staying at Los Angeles' Cecil Hotel. Police released elevator surveillance footage showing Lam behaving unusually, pressing buttons, stepping into the hallway, peering outside, and making gestures towards someone or something not visible on camera. 19 days after her disappearance, hotel workers investigating water problems found her body inside a rooftop water tank. The medical examiner ruled her death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing condition, and investigators found no evidence establishing homicide. Yet internet speculation exploded around questions of roof access, the tank, and the unsettling elevator footage. Later reporting showed that some supposedly impossible details had been exaggerated, including claims that the rooftop was completely inaccessible. That makes Lamb's death less paranormal than the internet made it, but still profoundly disturbing. Science can identify drowning. Surveillance can record behavior. Neither can reconstruct every decision that carried a young traveler from an elevator to that rooftop tank. Number 31. In 1987, West German politician Uwe Barschel was discovered dead in a bathtub at Geneva's luxurious Hotel Beau Rivage, fully clothed and surrounded by circumstances that triggered decades of suspicion. Barschel had recently resigned as minister-president of Schleswig-Holstein after a political scandal and traveled to Switzerland while insisting he could clear his name. An autopsy detected several drugs in his body, and suicide became the leading explanation. But questions persisted about the unusual combination of substances, their timing, and whether another person could have administered some of them. Journalists and investigators repeatedly revisited theories involving murder, intelligence services, and political enemies without producing proof strong enough to settle the matter. Later, forensic examinations refined aspects of the toxicology, but still failed to deliver the one thing everyone wanted: certainty about who administered what. A bathtub, a dead politician, and a complicated chemical trail produced plenty of theories. None became an uncontested final answer. Number 32. In 1978, CIA analyst John Paisley disappeared from his sailboat while cruising Chesapeake Bay. Days later, a body identified as Paisley was recovered from the water. Diving weights were attached to it, and a gunshot wound was found behind the left ear. Paisley had worked on some of America's most sensitive assessments of Soviet military capabilities, so his death immediately attracted theories involving espionage. Authorities considered suicide, while members of his family and outside researchers questioned whether the evidence really supported that conclusion. Even the identification of the body became controversial in later speculation, although no compelling evidence established that Paisley secretly survived. What makes the case endure is not one impossible clue, but the combination: a highly placed intelligence specialist, an abandoned boat, a weighted body, a gunshot wound, and Cold War secrecy surrounding his professional life. Sometimes mystery does not require missing evidence. Sometimes it begins when every piece of evidence seems capable of supporting two completely different stories. Number 33. The strangest mystery may be the one science cannot interrogate at all: what happens inside a person's final conscious seconds. Across these cases, modern tools can recover DNA from decades-old remains, reconstruct ancestry from teeth, model avalanches with computers, identify microscopic toxins, and calculate how bodies fall, burn, drown, or freeze. Yet those tools repeatedly stop at the same invisible wall. They can tell us what happened to a body without revealing what the person saw, feared, intended, or understood immediately beforehand. That gap is why cases like Somerton Man, Hinterkaifeck, the Lead Mask's deaths, and the Flannan Isles keep returning generation after generation. Some may eventually receive ordinary explanations. Others probably never will because crucial evidence disappeared with the dead themselves. And that is the uncomfortable finale. Science is extraordinarily good at reconstructing death, but sometimes the only person who knew the missing piece was the person who could never tell us.